we'll start the class. So I feel like we're kind of starting back from scratch again. Because I wasn't really thinking about the class, about school, being able to focus on school. And I thought, if I'm not really able to focus on it, I'm sure none of my students are focusing on it. And so if you recall what I said at the beginning of the semester, I try to say this to all my classes. I probably said it to this one too. If we have to close for a hurricane, the class should be the last thing on your mind. We'll get back to normal at some point and we'll resume the class. No big deal. So we're kind of taking it slow to get back into the swing of things. And so let me share the screen and I'll pull up Moodle and show you what I'm talking about as far as the schedule for the. I haven't done it for the rest of the semester, but I've done it up to the first test. Does anybody, this computer always does this to me. Does anybody know how to get the screen to be full screen on this thing? I can't get into Moodle.
Go on the top left corner again.
Okay.
And there's like a little green button right there. And that should,
Yeah, but it's not showing me the whole screen to where I can get to the Nichols site, to Moodle.
I'm not sure.
Well, maybe it is at the bottom too. Hang on. Yeah, okay. I usually get in a different way, but all right. All right, so I haven't, this I haven't updated yet. Don't believe. I will not. Yeah, just disregard this because I haven't updated it yet. But what happened? Okay, so if you come down here, all right, so we're going to go over problem set 1 tonight. That's due tonight. And then we're going to go over, I found out, I'd forgotten, but some of my students in the class today who took really good notes realized that we left off with chapters 9 and 10. So we were kind of behind anyway. So blessing in disguise, we can get caught up now. And so tonight we're going to go over the material for problem set 2. And then problem set 2 will be due next Wednesday, okay, on 9/29. And then problem set 3 is going to be due 2 weeks from tonight on 10/6. If we have a time tonight, we'll go over some of this material. And then problem set 4 is going to be due on 10/6 also. So next week, all you have to do is problem set 2, and then problem sets 3 and 4, 2 weeks from tonight. They're kind of short. And then the first exam will be October 13th here in the class, the Wednesday, that's October 13th. Now, if we get ahead on this material, I'll go ahead and we'll start with the new book before the exam. But this exam is only going to cover the material in the paperback book. So so I have everything updated up to October 13th, up to the first exam. And I still have to go in and change the due dates for everything else, including the reports and all that. Because what they did was, you may or may not have seen all this, they got rid of the 2 fall breaks. They got rid of the 2 fall breaks. They got rid of Thanksgiving, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Okay, I really don't want to make you guys come to class on the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. I don't think it's fair. So I'm thinking I'll probably do a recorded Zoom session or something. Or you'll have something to do, but I'm not doing that to you. I remember when I was a PhD student and I was sitting in a class on a Tuesday night before Thanksgiving. I think I might have had even a class on a Wednesday day, which was bad enough. So yeah, I'm not going to make you guys sit here till 9 o'clock on a Wednesday. So that Wednesday of Thanksgiving, we'll definitely, I'll do something on Zoom or something. You're not going to have to physically be here. The Wednesday before that, which is November 17th, that was when I was planning on having the second exam, and I'm going to be at a conference that night. So I'm going to try, hopefully that'll still work out where we can have exam 2 on that date. I'll have to look at the schedule. Anyway, those are my thoughts on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the homework assignment, the first problem set. So let me pull that up. Problem sets. Okay, and those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to chime in to participate in the discussion here. Right, so what have economists found based on the book and that article? What have economists found to be the most important factors for income disparity among nations? So what did they, anyone on Moodle want to take that? Anybody in the classroom?
According to the book, it was political and legal institutions of a country that can do such growth. And then in the article, by saying that they were investing in land into the capital, like long-term investment. And then the article, it was government intervention and international trade.
Right, so international trade helps, but so what they found was that you're correct. So they were trying to figure out, why are some countries rich and some countries poor? And the obvious one is natural resources. If a country has a lot of natural resources, they should be able to create wealth. But then that couldn't really explain countries like Russia, for example, that has a lot of natural resources and just is not a wealthy country. And so they found that the main driver of wealth is the political system, political and legal institutions. And so countries that have the rule of law, that have solid property rights and so forth, common law versus the civil law, tend to be better off. So basically it's the rule of law and legal and political and legal institutions that really is the biggest disparity. And that's from the book. And then in the article, the main thing that they talk about trade, of course, but the main thing that they mention is that some countries, the government, they have a dictatorial type of government, and the government basically dictates the capitalism. And so they mentioned South Korea. The government took it upon themselves to really promote productivity and so forth in trade. And China has done the same thing. And so sometimes the government has a hand in promoting that. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, and then for the second part. So if any of you have been employed with firms that deal with international issues, have you come across any issues that where these political and legal institutions affected your firm and it trying to grow into other areas? Anybody? How about you guys on Zoom? Colin, Miles, Cameron? What did you guys, what did, somebody speak up there? What did you put for that, the second part?
So for as far as internationally, I don't really have experience with that. I work at a small CPA firm, like in in Homa.
Okay,
And, I mean, I guess what I put was that the law system we have down here, in our country, it helps like promote people to start businesses without having restrictions and everything. So without that, I think the success of where I work at would be less. So
okay, say that again now.
I said where I work at,
No, what, the last point you were making, I lost you on that last point.
I said with the legal system we have in this country, it will encourage a lot more people to start small businesses and have those property rights and everything. And without that, there wouldn't be much success.
Oh,
You know,
okay, exactly. So that's a good point. I mean, even though you're not talking about international issues, if you think about the US, they really are, I mean, the way our laws are set up, it really does help small businesses. You can get these small business loans and you're bringing, of course, we're all thinking about the hurricane. So what Cullen was saying made me think way back to Katrina. And so I'm wondering if they're going to do this. They should do this for Ida too, because we've been hit much harder here for Ida. But Bobby Jindal was the governor when Katrina hit, and they developed what they called was the GO zone. So listen to how cool this is. If you were in the GO zone, which was Orleans Parish, Lafourche Parish, Terrebonne Parish, there may have been others, but those were the main ones. You could, if you started a business after Katrina, it was like 3 years afterwards, 3 or 4 years, at least 3, you could depreciate 90%. You had it was either 70, 80 or 90%. I forget what, but it was a really crazy number. And so you could depreciate, let's just say 70. It was at least 70% of your assets in the first year. So those of you think back to your accounting class, you remember everybody wants to take as much depreciation as they can in the first year because it reduces your net income drastically. And so so they were trying to encourage businesses to come into this area. And it wasn't just small businesses, it was also if you bought rental property, same thing, you got to deduct I think it was 70% in the first year. So they were really, that's one thing that the government did after Katrina to try to bring business back into and try to attract business into our area. So they may do that again. Hopefully, I'm sure the Biden administration doesn't even know anything about that. Hopefully, I'm sure Edwards remembers that though. Hopefully they'll bring it up. But anyway, so yeah, we are set up to really help entrepreneurs, and people in our country are very entrepreneurial compared to other countries where it's not as difficult, well, not as easy to do business. Okay, any other examples? Kaylee, let's see who else. Brianna, are you there? Caroline? Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on to the second one. This is why I do not like Moodle, because it's impossible to have a discussion. But moving on here. Okay, does your employer engage in outsourcing? So Cullen, let me go back to you. Since you work for a CPA firm in Homa, do you guys outsource some of the taxes and such?
No, we do everything in-house. It's like a medium-sized firm, so we um we don't engage in outsourcing at all, actually. Not that I know of. Um so
Okay, well,
Our firm does.
okay,
So we use a system called SurePrep. So basically for like your smaller, like more simple returns, we basically send off your information and this entity, SurePrep, they have workers that will basically work with, they will work on that returns. So that way we in-house can focus on the larger, harder
mhm,
returns while the simple ones
yeah.
can just,
Is it out,
roll.
is it outsourced in the US or internationally?
Yes, it's all,
It's all in the US.
I'm not really sure like where it's kind of like one of those firms that like you can work from home, I guess. So
Mhm.
if like you don't work for an individual firm and you just want to, work for yourself,
Mhm,
that's kind of what you do. So I'm really not sure where these workers
mhm,
are, but we
mhm,
just kind of send them all the information,
Mhm.
and then when it's ready, they email us. Now we have to go in and make sure it's right and that
Mhm.
we agree,
mhm,
but it speeds up the smaller
mhm.
returns.
Okay, so when that story is that, so a lot of some CPA firms do outsource the easier tax returns. One of my former students from this class, they were actually outsourcing to India. And he was just telling me some of the problems that they've had, that even though they're basic returns, when you outsource that stuff to other countries, it can be problematic. So there can be some issues with that, some unintended consequences. And a lot of medical labs now, they're outsourcing a lot of the testing, like to look at x-rays, to look at these CT scans and so forth. They're outsourcing that with, that can have some issues as well. All right, so any other examples of outsourcing?
I have one. So I work at a CPA firm and we have like one of our departments, the department I'm in is settlement fund. So we have a lot of claim forms that come in and it can be like hours of data entry. So we outsource it. Actually, it is a company in India, just to make it cheaper and to kind of free up some of our time.
Okay, so Sadie is talking about outsourcing to India. So how has that worked out? Has that been positive for your company or have you had issues?
No, it usually is because we don't send anything like nothing super personal, nothing with like too much information from people.
Okay,
So it's honestly usually pretty simple. It's usually like just thousands of documents that are the same thing. So sometimes we always have to like check it over, which could take a few hours, but nothing compared to what it takes them.
okay.
It's pretty
Yeah,
good.
I'll do it at a break because for some reason, once I get this hooked up, I can't adjust the volume. Sorry about that. So, okay, so that's good to hear, generally positive. And you had an example?
Well, we had a company that was also in India. It was not more physical, but it's more internet type.
Mhm,
So I would work with GEDs and high sets. And so when students in Louisiana would take the test, rather than going directly to an American source or station, it would go to India where they would process or organize the data and then give it back to us. It was a weird process.
Okay,
And so if there was a glitch or anything that would happen on their end or an update, it will shift the whole format and we have to contact them. So we, as a company, like our department, we weren't happy with it just because of the how long it could take to get the process fixed.
Mhm.
Because since we're opposite time zone,
mhm,
we would send one message the next day, then we could reply back. And it was just a very slow process to get it done. And usually, and also kind of like you'd be a little suspicious, like why is our information, student scores going out and then coming back to us. It's just how it was all laid out.
Mhm.
And so before I left, they were talking about getting another firm or somewhere in America, just so it'd be easier
Mhm.
one-on-one.
Mhm. Okay. All right, so what are the overall gains and losses of outsourcing in the short run? So, yeah, so basically, when you think about outsourcing, it's basically just the free trade of services. And so the gains are the companies who are outsourcing, they're cutting their costs. And so the companies are gaining, customers are gaining because it should make those goods and services cheaper. In the short run, the losses are the people who in America who have lost their jobs, obviously. And so those are the long run gains and losses. But in the short run, or excuse me, in the long run, those are the short run gains and losses. The long run economic effects are higher GDP because it's more efficient. And so theoretically, the people who have lost their jobs should get other jobs, retrain and get other jobs, but the benefits far outweigh the cost. So overall, you have this rise in GDP and this rise in income. So what is your overall opinion about outsourcing? Yes.
Okay, like Dr. Bajani said, I'd rather pay like $3. Well, from like a worker standpoint, like he said, I'd rather like employ someone and pay them like $3 rather than not have like a job at all. Like he was doing it for like paying them pretty long. Like that. So from that perspective, I think outsourcing is good.
Okay.
But you don't want to rely too much on the outsources too, just like with China and the chips. With the
Yeah.
vehicles, we're low on that.
I mean, there's
Right.
pluses and minuses to everything.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it depends on the actual product or services we're outsourcing.
Mhm.
But I think every state, every country should have one, like a backup, something that they can fall back on if that main outsourcing fails.
Yeah.
Also depends on the perspective you're looking at.
Yeah.
Right, and I mean, we've been talking about outsourcing of services, but the outsourcing of parts, we learned a hard lesson with COVID because we can't, I mean, I'm sure you all have tried to get things that you can't get, certain vitamins. That I normally order, I can't get anymore because they have no idea when they're gonna get this, all these little inputs come from China, the chips. And, a lot of things we're learning, for our own national security, it's probably not a good idea to just outsource all this stuff and have no way to make it in our own country anymore. Face masks, or when COVID first started, we had a shortage of face masks and it was crazy. And then what else was it? I think the ICU, the beds and such, we had a shortage of, or I forget all the details, but anyway, or was it the face masks? China was keeping the face masks and they weren't sending them because they needed them. And the N95s, not the regular, just any face mask, but the N95s. So anyway, so there's good and bad with it, of course. I think there needs to be some balance for sure. But, I think that getting back to the outsourcing of services, it had some really, it has had some negative unintended consequences for some companies because the customer service just isn't as good when you, a lot of times when you outsource to these foreign countries because there's a language barrier. And that's kind of an issue. So like, for example, Dell computers, they outsourced all their customer service. Then they brought it back. They had so many complaints, they brought it back and they have a big place down there. I think it's in Orlando or Tampa. They have a big customer call center. So I don't know about you guys, but when I call Apple, for example, I love that Apple does not outsource because there's not going to be a language barrier and you're going to get, most of the time you get somebody who knows what they're talking about and it's just a lot smoother process. Although, have you guys noticed a real drop off in the quality of service in general since COVID. It's terrible. It's terrible. And so the last call that I had with Apple was really interesting. I called them about something. I don't even remember what it was. And the girl, it was an American girl. I mean, they do outsource, I think they might outsource to Great Britain, but anyway, this is what happened. She didn't understand what was going on and she couldn't help me. And so she kept me on the line and she called a tech person, a higher level Apple tech person. And so it was this really snobby tech guy. I say snobby because he had an English accent, so it just makes you sound snobby anyway. And so he was trying to explain, he was explaining to her in a real condescending way what he should do, what she should do. And then he hung up on her. So it was kind of interesting how rude they are to their own people. But anyway, I have noticed a real drop off in service with the whole COVID thing because it's hard. It's really getting hard to hire people, quality people. So anyway, getting back to this, in the long run, outsourcing is, there's certainly some problems with it, but in the long run, the gains outweigh the losses overall. Okay, next one, do a brief web search on corporate tax rates in the US versus other nation. What does your research suggest? What would you recommend to our policymakers? Okay, so what did you find when you did a web search on our tax rates versus the rest of the world? Anybody?
Ours were definitely relatively like the average, and we were more on like the high side. We weren't as high as like Africa or like United Arab Emirates.
Mhm.
Like definitely, it was like for 2020 was 36 point something percent.
21%.
Right.
We're at 21 right now.
Oh, well, it was one.
We were at 35.
Yeah,
Okay, so I was looking at,
yeah.
I was looking at like 2020 or something.
Well, okay, we were at 35, and when President Trump was elected, basically two things that he said he was going to do was two of the things that he said he was going to do that he actually did was he was going to cut out a lot of the red tape, a lot of the bureaucracy in the government, which he did, reform the tax system. He also lowered taxes for lower corporate taxes and lowered personal taxes, our personal taxes. So we had 30, I think it was a 35%. I was thinking 33, but I think if you saw 35, it's either 33 or 35. So we went from the low 30s all the way down to a 21% corporate tax rate. So that's a significant drop in corporate taxes. The reason that he did that is because pretty much any economic study that you look at shows that productivity is improved if you lower taxes, because people are incentivized to work more with lower taxes. Of course, certainly from a personal perspective, but from a corporate perspective, we're in a global economy now. A company can be headquartered anywhere it wants to be. They don't have to be headquartered here in the US. And so with tax rates so high, all these profits were going elsewhere. And so they wanted to bring companies back into the US. And so that's one reason why after Trump was elected, the stock market did so well and continued to do well during his whole administration, because if corporate tax rates are decreased, that's cutting costs, increasing profits for companies. And so if you're cutting costs for firms and increasing profits, stock's going to go up. In addition, when he lowered the personal tax rate, it's like we all got a raise. Now our rate's only lowered by around 4% on average, but it's like we all got a raise. It means we're going to spend money. And so that, again, that also helped the market. So, I mean, now the Biden administration, did you see what the Biden administration wants to raise taxes to? Anybody? Anyone on Zoom? Did you find out what the Biden administration has said?
I saw 28%, I believe.
Yeah, me too.
You saw 28, okay, I saw
Yeah.
29, but that was right after Biden was elected, so if you saw 28, then that's probably right, but they haven't done anything yet, but they're talking about raising it up to 28%. So we'll see what happens. That's not gonna, that will affect the stock market adversely, for sure, but they kind of quit talking about it. So we'll see what happens. Nothing's gonna happen until after the midterm elections, I think. So anyway, and then another interesting situation with the taxes is if you look as a case study, and they mentioned this in the book, if you look at Ireland. So in Ireland, they lowered the tax rate way down to like, I think it's 12.5%. And they give a rebate for research and development. And so next time you get a prescription filled, or if you happen to see the actual original bottle of a prescription, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies are over in Ireland, and that's why. But that's a really interesting study, and it shows how much it's improved their economy when they lowered the tax rates. A lot of these companies now have gone over there. So anyway, that contrary to what you read in the popular media, lower tax rates are better because it incentivizes people and companies to be more productive. Okay, compare and contrast poverty throughout history compared to modern times, as well as the effect of capitalism on poverty. Okay, so just briefly, what did you put for this? So how has poverty changed from the past historically to today? We have less poverty, more poverty. What does poverty mean today versus back in, through history, even going back like 40 years?
I had seen that 50 years ago, it was like more than half of the population lived in poverty, and now it's only down to about 15%.
Right. So
Drastic change in the amount.
right. So poverty, I think somewhere in the book, they say 40 in the 1960s. They mentioned the 1960s because President Johnson declared a war on poverty. There were 40 million people living below the poverty line. Today, there's 40 million people still living below the poverty line, but of course, our population has increased by a lot. So the number of people in poverty has decreased quite a bit. And also poverty today is not like poverty poverty back 40, 50 years ago. What's different? Well, we have a much higher standard of living. And so, being in poverty in this country, you're a lot better off than living in poverty in a third world country. And so we have a lot of cheap, we have a lot more consumer goods. A lot of things are really cheap. And also, a lot of our consumer goods are cheaper. Our standard of living is has for everyone is higher. Also, there's a lot more in-kind payments. And so when they look at these poverty statistics, they don't include all of the payments, in-kind payments that people get. And by that, I mean, they don't include welfare. They don't include food stamps. They don't include like the WIC program, housing. So all of these government things that we have in place to help people, that's not really included when you look at and you say, oh, well, they're in poverty. So we actually have a lot fewer people. I mean, it's not like it was 40, 50 years ago because we have all these safety nets, so to speak. But with that being said, I mean, I'm not trying to seem insensitive. There certainly are a lot of people suffering out there. I was talking to a student of mine after class today. They evacuated to Houston, and his son is working at this restaurant in Houston. He stayed in Houston. He's working at this high-end restaurant. And he's telling me about the money that people spend at these restaurants in Houston. $18,000 bottle of wine. I mean, and it's just crazy. I mean, I would feel guilty. honestly, I feel guilty drinking an $18,000 bottle of wine. So the point that I'm making is there are a lot of people who are suffering for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who are homeless and more homeless than ever because of COVID. And I think the Biden administration voted to extend the anti-eviction thing. Did they not? Did anybody see that?
I thought it,
Or did
they
they?
extended it, but then the extension is now over.
I think you're right. I think it is over. So that extension of not being able to evict people just ended. So and there are millions of people who are behind in their mortgage payments because they took this deferment, this COVID deferment, which is really not a smart thing to do because the COVID deferment, it's like a deal with the devil. Because when that deferment ends, these banks want all the money in arrears. And the only way to get out of that is if you can convince the bank to redo your loan, if you can show a financial need, and they'll put all that you owe on the back end. So we might end up seeing a lot more foreclosures and a lot more homeless people because of the thing has expired, the not being able to evict people because of COVID. So anyway, we have we are a much wealthier society in general. The world, there through free trade and technology, everyone is better off. But so being in poverty today is not like in the past, but still there are a lot of people who are suffering. Okay, does money buy happiness? If so, how much money do you think it takes to be happy? Okay, so what's your thought? We talked about this in class, of course. What is does money buy happiness?
Statistically, yes.
Okay, there is a positive correlation between money and happiness. And people who have money tend to be happier. But if you're a miserable person, you're not going to be, money will not make you happy. But money can eliminate
It just makes life easier.
Yeah, makes life easier. And so I've been thinking about this. I wanted to share this story with you all. We have some friends who live in Playa del Carmen, which is by Cancun. And so we had them out. We flew them out we've gone there and stayed a couple of times with them and stayed at their house. So we saved a bunch of money not having to go to hotels. And so they have tourist visas. So we flew them up to the US. And so it was just really interesting seeing the way they acted when they got to the US, because they're not wealthy people. They're basically like a lot of people down in Mexico. They're struggling to get by because in Mexico, they don't have safety nets like we do. If you, like our friend, the husband, he's always worked in the tourist industry. Now he's 58 and he can't get a job now because he's too old. So they just tell you, just basically go take a hike. You're not attractive anymore. You're kind of old. We're not hiring you. It's not like in the US where you'll get sued. So anyway, long story short, they came up here and, I was telling my husband, I said, well, they don't have a skill set or a degree. And so now they're really suffering, but we have a skill set, we have degrees, and we have a better standard of living. But anyway, I took his wife to Walmart twice, and she was buying clothes at Walmart. And I've been to the Walmart in Cancun, in Playa, so I know there's a Walmart there. And so finally I said, are things really that much cheaper here in Walmart? Because they were so excited about the Walmart here in the US. And he said, yeah, he said, at that Walmart the Walmart's down in Mexico, there's an import tax. I thought, I don't know why they're paying that where we had NAFTA, but there's some kind of import tax and everything. It almost made me feel guilty with all of the blatant consumerism that we have in this country. And then last Sunday, my daughter and I went to, have you guys ever been to the Dillard's outlet store? So they have one in Kenner, they have one in Slidell. And so I used to live in Slidell. It's kind of depressing to go to this Dillard's outlet store in Slidell at the Slidell Mall, because that's pretty much all that's left of the mall, except for that in an at-home store. And I would just remember, you guys probably remember when you were little, you could go to an indoor mall. There were all these stores. There was a movie theater. I don't know how the Homa Mall looks these days, but the Slidell Mall is basically done. So anyway, we take her to this to the Dillard's outlet store. And if you're not familiar with the Dillard's outlet store, it's all of the Dillard's stuff from that comes, all their sales stuff comes to these outlet stores. It's crazy. They have everything on racks by color, by size. I mean, you have to really like to shop to do this. So anyway, long story short, we go there and then we find out it's the last day of a half price sale. So everything there was half price. And anyway, I just, I was telling my daughter, I said, and you know, it's so cheap. It just, and it almost, it makes me feel guilty to live in this country, honestly, to just, because we have it so much easier overall compared to other people. And so I just thought they must just think we're like rolling in money and just greedy consumerists because we, you know, it's just so easy. It's so much easier here. And people are happier here overall because it's an easier life compared to other countries. So anyway, I tell my husband whenever he complains about the US or complains about his life, just go move to Mexico, go move to another country. Go somewhere else for a while. If you're complaining about the politics here or this, that, and the other thing, go try to live somewhere else, you know? So anyway, that was my story I wanted to tell you about how, you know, we don't, it really opens your eyes when you travel. If you haven't traveled yet, if you have the chance to travel abroad, it does really open your eyes just to, I mean, I'm not saying that America's great. I mean, there's better places than America for sure, but it is interesting just to see how other people live in other countries and so forth, and how much, I mean, one of the problems with us, with this country is we don't have socialized medicine. We don't have free healthcare, which is really interesting when you read online about what people who visit this country find crazy. And they just think that's absolutely insane that everyone doesn't have healthcare, because there's so many countries in Europe that have free healthcare. They feel that it's a right. And so anyway, that's one of our issues here that we've been trying to fix for years, and can't seem to fix that. Okay, moving on then to number 6. Okay, what are the economic effects of the baby boomers leaving the workforce? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Or both? Okay, go ahead. How is it both?
Well, the boomers were the ones that brought economic growth, 2% every year, basically. And
Yeah.
now that and so now the workforce is filled with these baby boomers, and the new generation's coming in, like you had the conversation, whether it's the conflict. And now that they're retiring, the economic growth will slowly go down until 2030.
Yeah.
Until hopefully we'll have another baby boomer coming, next generation coming in. But with the new generation, you get new technology, new ideas. But the baby boomers have the knowledge and experience that hopefully they'll give up, pass
Mhm.
on. But there's still that conflict or war in the workplace because of this, the old and the new.
Yeah, of course, there's the cultural issues, the cultural conflicts, the generational conflicts, but there's a lot of there is a lot of knowledge, a real brain drain with the baby boomers leaving, and we don't have, unfortunately, there was a little mini baby boom in the 80s. In the 70s, it was the whole hippie generation in the 70s, and it was all free love, but we're not going to bring kids into this world because yada, yada, yada. So there was not, the birth rate was not very high in the 70s. Then in the 80s, you had the yuppies coming along and they're having kids. And so you had this little mini baby boom, but overall the birth rate is down for a lot of cultures. And that's not good for us because you need the younger generation to be in the workforce. So that's another reason why we really should be a little bit more pro on immigration. Now, and I don't mean unskilled labor. I mean, we should want to keep skilled labor in this country. Why are we letting international students come over here come to state schools where we're supplementing some of the tuition with state dollars, with taxpayer dollars, and then letting those students or making those students go back home. So if we're bringing students over here to educate them, let's keep those students over here. And I can just tell you two really crazy stories about how screwed up our immigration system is. So we had this student years ago. He was from Russia. He came over here when he was 16 and he played tennis for Arkansas, University of Arkansas. He got his degree and then he ends up at Nichols as an assistant tennis coach. He goes through our MBA program. He gets a job in finance. This is right around the time that Putin invaded the Crimea, which I think was that was part of the problem, was a political issue. So anyway, he gets a job here in Thibodeau. He's graduated, he has a job in finance. His visa comes up for renewal. After the employers jumped through all these hoops to get him hired, the US declines to renew his visa and makes him go back to Russia. Guess what their reason was? He wasn't working in his field of tennis. When he had a degree in finance and he was working in his degree. So that's just one example of, we lost a really good person there. And then I had another student, she was actually my GA. And she was one of the French exchange students. We have this agreement with, I don't know if you guys are aware, but occasionally we have some French students who come over. And so she really wanted to stay in this country. And so she went to San Diego, and I was visiting my family out there and I met her. And once your student visa expires, you have to leave if you can't get a work visa. And so the way the system works is, in order to get a job, there has to be a need, you have to have someone sponsor you. So it's not just like you and I going and getting a job. The employer has to pay money to sponsor them and so forth. And so she was trying to get a job and nobody would give her a job because they didn't want to jump through all these hoops. So she had to go back to France. So anyway, we really should try to fine tune our immigration policies to keep good people here, because we need skilled labor. We need an educated workforce. We need to keep these people in our country. It would help with the job market here, because the birth rate is not very good in this country. Okay, enough of that. Okay, so what is a recession? What is the popular definition versus the NBER definition? So what's the popular definition of a recession? Yeah, 2/4 of declining GDP. The NBER definition is, that's when it's I can't remember it all off the top of my head, but it's the it's the depth, it's the 3 Ds. You have to have these 2 areas where you have a consecutive decline. And so it's a lot more complicated and more involved. But basically, for the exam, make sure you know what the NBER definition is. But basically a recession, just to think of it, to take away from this class, 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP, we're in a recession. All right. Okay, so this is a good one here. So what is GDP? How would you define GDP?
Income.
Right. So GDP is gross domestic product, everything, all of the goods and the services combined. And it's a circular situation. It's a circular model. So everything that we produce is everything that we purchase and everything that we make. And so GDP equals income. And so the higher our GDP, the higher the income that we have, and the higher the standard of living. And so if you use that rule of 72, if GDP is growing at 3% a year, which that's about the average, if you take 72 divided by 3%, that means that our standard of living is doubling every 24 years. 72 divided by 3 is 24. So every generation, we're doubling our standard of living. So this ties back to the other question about poverty. Okay. So anyway, let's talk about the current administration. How has the economic policies of the current US administration affected GDP, or how are they affecting GDP growth? Okay, so you'd have to think about COVID with this. So what is GDP these days? What is the growth, and how has the administration affected GDP growth?
Well, I think we looked at it before, we were on break, and it was increasing, and I think we discussed, we can think that it's because we're coming, out of the virus and things are getting back to the normal. But I guess the question is, how long can we sustain that, constant increase?
Right. Did anybody look up GDP growth? Is it about, I think it's about 6%. Did anybody happen to see that? I mean, we'll look at it later, later in the semester, but the GDP growth has typically it's between 2 and 3%. It went down 30% when COVID hit, then the next quarter was up 30%. But I think they're talking about around a 6% year to year growth for GDP. And in fact, anyway, don't quote me on that, but we've got some pretty healthy GDP growth right now. So why is causing that? Getting back to the economic policies of the Biden administration. How are they?
Stimulus?
Exactly. So I was talking to my mother last night, and she says, "Oh, your Uncle Bobby just got another stimulus check." And I said, "Oh, I heard something about that, but why are they giving stimulus checks out still?" I mean, my uncle's retired. It just goes back to, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, I'm not picking on the Biden administration. I'm just saying this administration, whoever's in charge of this, whatever economists are advising him, it's ridiculous, because they're not means testing it. They're not looking at people who actually need stimulus money and giving it to them. They're just mailing out these checks to
What
people.
about the upcoming vaccine mandates for people I know or seen online having to quit their job or being fired because of this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about that. Personally, I say just get the vaccine. I'm a pro-vaccine person, but I'm speaking from my perspective. I'm sure there's people. I mean, unless you're like my son, who just says, "Oh, my son says, oh, it's a fake disease. I'm not getting a vaccine." You can't even talk to him. And I said, it's not a fake disease. And then he says, "Oh, well, look at all these people who got the vaccine and got sick and got this." And then when he was visiting me over the summer, I'm listening to his podcast that he listens to every morning. And it's people agreeing and spouting the same stuff that he is spouting. So it's like, that's the problem. I was telling him, I said, that's the problem with this country right now, is everyone is just listening to what they agree with. You're only listening to what you agree with. And, just get the vaccine was my point. I said, I'm not gonna, badge you about it, but just get the vaccine. But anyway, but I'm sure there are some people who have legitimate health problems with it, and maybe that don't want to take the vaccine. So yeah, I don't think it's right. I guess a private company can do whatever they want, but I don't think it's right necessarily to lose your job over not taking a vaccine. But I thought this was really interesting, because I was thinking it's just, this whole drama over the vaccine, taking the vaccine and not taking the vaccine, and how so many people aren't taking the vaccine. And I thought, this is the problem with America today. back when we had the polio vaccine, everyone took the vaccine. That's what I was thinking. Everyone took the polio vaccine and everyone lined up to take it and it was no problem at all. And now we're all screwed up today because of the media. Well, then I was talking to my mother's 78 years old, and she said, oh no. She said, people would not take the polio vaccine. People were refusing to take it because they thought they were going to get polio from it. And so if you, I mean, we're all too young to remember polio, but it was a huge deal. Polio, it was very contagious and you never knew if you were going to get it or if you weren't going to get it. It happened really fast. You could be paralyzed. So something like that, you would think, oh, well, people are going to take the vaccine right away. But it was the same situation. It was a mistrust of the government, kind of like it is today. So I don't know. I just, it sure seems to be that, you know, a lot of people the more people who are getting it, of course, aren't vaccinated. But my son-in-law wasn't going to get the vaccine. And he said, he was arguing with me about it. He said, Sherry, I'm in good health. Why should I take the vaccine when I only have like, you know, less than a 1% chance of dying from the vaccine? He's an engineer. You never argue with an engineer, because then he was showing me all these statistics. So then I saw something on the news about all these people who didn't have the vaccine, who were getting sick because of the Delta variant. And so I texted him and I said, please take the please consider taking the vaccine, yada, yada, yada. And so like around 5 hours later, he says, is this a canned text or something? And I said, no, that's me. And he says, oh, I got it before my mother came out. So his mother talked him into it because she was elderly, you know, and she came out. So anyway, but you bring up a good point. I don't really have the answer to it. I don't think it's fair that you should lose your job. I mean, we do have civil liberties in this country.
I
So,
was thinking like how things, the upcoming events, the COVID, how that may affect the growth. I mean, now that things are, yes, we are seeing an increase now. But for future, like how,
yeah,
when will it?
well, right. And our GDP is up only because of the stimulus.
Right.
So you're right. It's going to adversely affect GDP as this continues on, because it's going to be just like the flu. You know, they're going to continue to have these boosters. And this is one thing that I actually should tell my son this. It will make him even more paranoid. But I know someone who is in his 60s. Okay. He got the vaccine and 4 weeks later, he had a stroke. He had what was it called? Ischemic. You guys who are in healthcare I might be mispronouncing that, but he had an ischemic stroke. He's fine, but he had a stroke, ischemic stroke. And so I saw him a few weeks ago and I said, oh, are you going to get the booster shot? And he says, no. He said, my doctor told me not to get it. My doctor told me he thinks I had a stroke because of the COVID vaccine. And so they're finding, they don't know why, but there's a very small percentage of people 4 weeks after they get the vaccine, they're having strokes. I mean, it's super small percentage, but he's one of them. And so his doctor actually said, you know, there was no reason for you to have a stroke. And we think it's because of the vaccine, and they're studying it. So you're going to hear more about that. And so they told him not to get the booster. So, but anyway, of course, there's a risk with everything. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think if you really feel strongly and not wanting to get the vaccine, you shouldn't have to. So one of my students was telling me today that they're not really talking about this in the news, but in Australia, they're tracking people down literally and forcing them to get the vaccine. This one guy climbed onto his roof to get away from him, and they supposedly tracked him down on the roof and gave him the shot. So there's it's all over social media, evidently. So.
That's right, there's even the curfews, if you get caught, you have a very high fine, bail out, you know, and, you know, it's real bad.
Yeah, right. So, okay, anyway, back to the GDP growth. So the stimulus has helped the GDP growth, obviously. What policies inhibit GDP growth? Well, that would be higher taxes, would be an example of policies that inhibit GDP growth. Higher taxes, trade barriers can inhibit GDP growth, those kinds of things. Okay, so what's your prediction? What did you put for this? What is your prediction about the US economy over the next few years? And I mean, your answer, I can guarantee you would be just as good as any economist in New York, Washington, or anywhere, because nobody can predict the future. But what do you think is going to happen with the economy? Anybody? How about someone on Zoom? What's your prediction of the economy over the next few years? Are you positive or negative on it?
I think that with especially with the higher taxes coming up, I think it's gonna probably slowly decline. I also
Okay.
think that all this stimulus money will probably catch up to us. I don't know if it's gonna be sooner rather than later, but I would hope that it's more gradual than, yeah.
Right.
So that was my take on it.
Okay.
I mean, someone has to be responsible for the government just continually, sending out, all these checks. So
Right.
it looks fine right now, but the overall question is when does it, hit? It's
Mhm.
not if, it's when do we feel the effects of all this?
Right. It's probably going to be later than sooner, because they always seem to have these stopgap measures to kick the can down the road. And so let me just share with you what's going on today. It doesn't really matter for this assignment because you already turned it in, but this will matter just for thinking about the big picture when you do your project. So did you guys, if you've been following the markets, the market was way down on Monday, and then the Feds met today. And the Federal Reserve said that they are not going to raise interest rates. They're just going to kind of keep them steady between 0 and 1/4 point. And they said, I thought this was really interesting and kind of counterintuitive in a way. The Fed said that their target for inflation is 2% on average. And we've had inflation over the past few years. We've had inflation's been lower than 2%. We've actually had some deflation. So inflation has been lower than 2%. So they're perfectly fine with allowing inflation to be a little higher in the near term because it'll all average out. So I was thinking, that makes no sense to me. Why would you allow inflation to be higher in the near term just because you want to have this average? Because what's past is past. So we're going to suffer with higher inflation so they can just have this average. But anyway, basically what they said was that they're going to watch, they're going to keep what they call a dovish, what they call is an accommodative policy or a dovish policy, meaning they're very accommodative. So they're not going to let us go into a recession, but they're not going to let inflation go rampant either. So they're going to monitor things. They're slowly getting us off of the stimulus. They said they're going to stop this, slowly stop the stimulus program, and they're going to stop buying bonds. Okay, so when they buy bonds, that stimulates the economy, because when they buy bonds, they're putting money into the economy. That helps to keep interest rates low. So they're going to stop doing that slowly. And so they basically said, we're going to slowly get us off the stimulus, slowly get us off of all the lower interest rates and the freer money. And yeah, inflation might be a little bit higher because the economy is growing so much right now, but that's okay because it's been abnormally low for a long time. And they want to keep this average of 2%. So the market really liked this. The market was up like 500 points today. Well, that's just 1%, but the Dow was up. The market sold off about 2% on Monday, and now they've kind of slowly rebounded. So the economy seems like it's just going to going along fine. It'll keep going along fine until it doesn't, until there's some kind of shock. But we'll see what happens. So probably the prediction over the next few years is going to be okay. You never can predict the future. I don't think that we're going to necessarily go into a recession. We'll just kind of keep going along with economic growth. But Colin's right. at some point, we have to pay the piper, and at some point, we have to increase taxes, and we have to do these, institute these policies that will increase taxes, and that will slow economic growth. So this growth can't go on forever. And
I actually had a
eventually-
question as
Yeah.
well.
Go ahead, Con.
So with so GDP takes into account the national debt too. So it's kind of like a net effect. Is that how it works?
No, GDP doesn't take into account the national debt. I'm just saying that, what I'm saying is that if you have this high national debt, eventually we're going to have to raise taxes, and raising taxes makes everything more, raising taxes is like increasing costs, just like lowering taxes is like us getting a raise, and lowering costs and increasing profitability for companies. If you increase taxes, it's like we all just got a pay cut. So when you increase taxes, that's going to cause the economy to slow down, and that slows GDP.
Okay. Because I was just wondering if it's growing and they have all the stimulus while it's growing, how does that make sense with the debt they're taking on doing it? But now that makes sense. I thought it took into account that too. But
No, it does. Yeah, it doesn't take into account the debt. There is. So I'm just looking at a chat room thing. So yeah, there is definitely less poverty today for sure. But the GDP doesn't take into account the debt, but we're artificially, our GDP, I guess you could say our GDP is artificially higher than it should be because of all the money that the government's spending on stimulus and so forth.
gotcha.
All right. Is that it? Okay, that's it. All right. So let's take a break. Let's take 10 minutes, and I'm going to stop the recording. I'll come back in 10 minutes. So that's 7:20. What time is it? 7:12. 7:22. I'll come back. Okay, I started the recording. Let me share the screen. Okay, so we left off. I'm just going to pick up again with 9 and 10 because we started 9 and 10, but it's been so long. It's like we're starting over anyway. So this is this material that we're starting tonight is for the second homework assignment. So let's take a look at chapters 9 and 10, the disappearing middle class and capital, wealth, and inequality. All right, so the middle class has been in a decline in the US. So you may or may not have heard this, but they haven't really talked, that really wasn't much of a talking point during the last election. But during the Obama, when Obama was elected, during that presidential race, there was all this talk about the classes and how the middle class is disappearing. People don't have less real income than ever before, and so forth. Well, that's actually not the case. When you look at the statistics, the middle class is shrinking, but there's actually more people rising out of the middle class on the top end than there are people who are falling down on the bottom end. And so basically what you have are a lot of professionals. So if you make, I think it's like 120,000 or more, they consider you to be out of the middle class. And so there's a lot of people with professional degrees, pharmaceutical sales, engineers, financial planners, just, a lot of people who have these professional degrees, people in tech, who are moving out of the middle class. So there actually is, so that the statistics tell us that the middle class is shrinking, but more people are leaving on the top end than the bottom end. All right, and Also, I found this really interesting. I probably mentioned this in class last time, but it's important and you may have forgotten it. You know, everybody thought, I mean, me included, I thought COVID was going to be a really negative situation. We were going to go into a recession, housing prices would decline. None of that has happened. It's crazy to me to think that housing prices, we're in this housing boom right now. So actually the numbers are showing that, of course, there are people who have been affected by COVID. There are people really suffering because of COVID. They've lost their jobs and so forth. It's mainly people in the service industry, but the majority of people are better off. They're showing that wealth increased over the past year. Wealth, our household wealth has increased more than any time in like the last 20 years. Okay, so here's the reasons why. The stimulus money, okay, we've increased wealth because of the stimulus money, number one. Number two, we were stuck in our houses and we weren't buying anything. So our consumption was way down, okay? Because so we had the stimulus, our consumption was way down. So that, and we also people paid off bills with the stimulus money. They reduced the debt. And then what was the fourth one? Can't remember now. Okay, so stimulus money, cut consumption, paid off bills. Oh, the wealth effect from the stock market. The market's way up, housing market and the stock market. So you've got the wealth effect for people who have assets, financial assets and real assets. People were not spending money. They paid down debt and the stimulus money. So those four factors have created the situation where people are coming out of COVID wealthier than they were going into it. Now, this crazy housing market is not going to last because we had a situation where we have basically a lack of supply. And it also goes back to our supply chain. Can't get the materials to build homes. And so we're already seeing, I just saw a news article today, the latest home builders data, or the latest home data showed that housing prices have started to decline and housing demand has gone down. Housing demand is weakened and housing prices have started to decline in some markets. Okay, but anyway, that's just a side note about wealth and so forth. Okay, so why is the middle class? Here's some reasons why the middle class is shrinking. So what I was telling you about people going out of the middle class, that's an article that I read in the Wall Street Journal. But this is what they talk about in the book, which kind of ties back to what was in the Wall Street Journal. So brains versus bronze. You've got, what they mean by that is you have more high-tech jobs and fewer manufacturing jobs. So these higher tech jobs, white collar type jobs, tend to pay more than the blue collar jobs. That's one reason. Another reason is formal education. We're more educated now as a society. So we have higher incomes. Hours of work, people are working more, working longer. And then globalization. So globalization has enabled us, free trade and globalization has enabled people to become better off. Okay, number 10 or chapter that. So they're talking about this in chapter 9. Okay, in chapter 10. Okay, you hear about, again, they didn't really talk about this much during the last presidential election, but the presidential election 2 times before, they were really talking about the haves and the have-nots and how the rich are getting richer and blah, blah, blah. So getting back to this, getting back to what I was talking about, how about how wealth has grown so much since over the last year or so. The rich are getting richer. The rich are going to continue to get richer because it takes money to make money. And so I teach this financial planning class, and we were doing this interesting example on Monday that I just thought up off the top of my head. What if you took your stimulus money and you just banked it? So the typical, I think, I don't have anything to base this on, but just from my just from my surveying my own family members who got stimulus money and didn't need it. My sister has 3 kids. They got over $7,000 in stimulus money, 3 checks. So I just took a ballpark figure. What if, let's just take $7,000. I think the typical family probably got about $7,000 in stimulus. What if you didn't have to spend that money? Okay, what if you took that $7,000 and you put it in a stock account, opened up an account, put it in the stock market, and you made 10% on it? What would you have in 40 years? Just forgot about it till you retired. That $7,000 in 40 years is $318,000. In 45 years, it's like almost $500,000. It's crazy. So the point that I'm making is, basically in this country, you have, and other countries too, but you have the haves and the have-nots. You can really kind of separate people into 2 groups: those who own assets and those who do not. And what I mean by that is those who own a home and or own stocks, and those who don't. And so if you think about that, people who have scrimped, and I'm not talking about wealthy people who were born with money. Anybody can get there if you just save. And you've got to scrimp and save. You got to start somewhere. Most of us all had to start from nothing. And so if you save money and invest it in the stock market, where you can make on average easily 8% a year on average, the actual average historically is 12%. So if you put money in stocks and invest it, and then you buy a house or don't buy a house, but eventually you're going to make money, the power of compounding will work in your favor. So the point I'm making is, it takes money to make money. And so if you already have money, it's just going to compound, and that's why the rich are getting richer. So to me, it really pains me when I don't know if I told this class, but last spring especially, I was telling my classes, I went to New Orleans a couple times last spring when the city, we started opening up from COVID. I had to go to a conference in New Orleans last Easter, and it's the craziest thing I've ever seen. There were so many people in New Orleans on vacation, spending stimulus money, talking about it. My husband and I went to One Canal Place. At the Louis Vuitton store, there was a line out of the door, people spending their stimulus money. And so I was telling my husband, I said, remember when we used to come down for Mardi Gras when we were young, and we would see these people with these signs that would say, take Jesus into your life, repent. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but they will always have these people with these signs during Mardi Gras. And I said, I feel like walking around with a sign saying, don't spend your stimulus money. Invest your stimulus money, or you're going to be broke again in 6 months. Just put it in a Robinhood account, and you'll thank me later. So anyway, the point that I'm making there is, if we as economists are always talking about equality and trying to eliminate poverty. But if you took everybody at Nichols and you gave them all $10,000, if you made everybody equal in one day economically, it wouldn't stay that way, because some people are going to go spend the money. Some are going to go to the bars, some will use it on drugs. Some people will just go on vacation. Some people will spend half and save half. Some people will be really miserly and save it all, invest it all. So, there's always going to be some amount of inequality. It's basically, a lot of it has to do with the choices that you make. So anyway, back to this, the rich are getting richer because it takes money to make money. It's the power of compounding. But here's the reasons in the book. There are some legitimate reasons why the rich are getting richer. And this is really interesting. So we have this income inequality in this country, but according to the book, they're claiming that 75% of the income inequality is not because of racism or you know, this for the prejudicial issues or lack of opportunity for people, that there's some actual legitimate reasons. And 75% of income inequality is because of this. Okay, this is really interesting. An older population. So, huh?
The boomers.
Yeah, the baby boomers. So, you know, the baby boomers get so much flack, and they're so much resentful of the baby boomers because the baby boomers are seen as being successful and blah, blah, blah. And I have a sister who's 10 years younger than me, and we don't really see eye to eye in politics. And it's so annoying when I talk to her because, not because of politics, but she was talking, and it's just interesting when you talk to somebody and you wonder where they're coming from because they have such a totally different view compared to what you have. So, and plus, since my sister and I are 10 years apart, it's like we had two separate childhoods. I don't know if you have siblings that are older or much younger than you, but it's totally two different experiences. So anyway, let me get to the point here of what I'm talking about. So I'm having a conversation with my sister one day, and she's complaining about how much money my mother has and how much money my parents have. Well, my parents came from nothing, absolutely nothing. And they saved, and they bought a house in California, and the house is appreciated. And now they're really old. My father's passed away, but now my mother's older, and she's got a lot of equity. She's comfortable now because of the way that they saved. And I see my sister, they're spendthrifts. They spend money like crazy, but then they complain that they don't have any money, and they're resentful of my mother and talking about how the baby boomers had it so easy, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I just had to stop her. I said, wait a second. You know, I said, when I was a kid, we had one used car, and my mother would drive my dad to work on the one day she had to go grocery shopping. And so, and we lived in a rental apartment until I was 10 years old. And so I was trying to basically say to her, the baby boomers have worked. They've worked hard pretty much their whole life. And anyway, so the point I'm getting at is older people tend to have more money because they've saved all their lives, because they've had time to save. It's not rocket science. It's just that the older you are, the more time you have to save. So a lot of these baby boomers are well-to-do because they've had a lot of time to save, and they've bought houses and they've appreciated. So anyway, the older population is one reason why the rich are getting richer. The second reason is better education. So if you think back, into historically, we're more educated as a society than we've ever been. Back in the up until the 40s, 50s, and even the 60s, only the wealthy, especially from the 50s and before, I'd say before World War II, you had only the wealthy went to college. It was very difficult to go to college. Your family had to have money to pay the tuition. The GI Bill really helped a lot of people to go to college, because if you served in the military, you could go to school on the GI Bill, and now there's student loans and so forth. So anyway, there is definitely a significant positive correlation between education and the amount of money that you're going to make. Education, if you look at somebody with a bachelor's degree versus a high school diploma, you're talking about $1 million in income over your lifetime that you're going to earn over that person with a high school diploma. And then, okay, so better education. And then this one is not quite as important, but they mentioned in the book, it's called accounting fiction, corporate income versus personal income. So what they're saying there is that people, when taxes were a lot higher, back in the 60s and 70s, people would transfer, if they had small businesses, they would transfer their income to the company. So they were taking a really small salary and transferring the bulk of the income, keeping it in the company, because they could use these tax shelters. But when taxes were reduced and the tax shelters kind of went away, then they transferred it back over to the personal income. So it seems like income has gone up as a result of that. All right. Okay, so then I say here, in addition, think of the power of compounding regarding investment income. And then education, they also find in the book that education is the key to upward mobility. And so these are the reasons why the rich are getting richer in this country. Now, so pretty much everybody else is doing better, except high school dropouts. If you don't have a high school degree, you're in direct competition with unskilled labor, with immigrants. And so if you think about the jobs, the unskilled labor, the unskilled jobs that you pretty much are relegated to if you don't have an education, you're in competition with new immigrants. And so that's an issue. So their wages have actually gone down, and that's a problem. Okay, so that's chapter 10, just dealing with the income inequality and what are some of the factors that cause the income inequality. Right, any questions or comments? All right, let me go to the next one then. Okay, so this deals with something called stagflation. So stagflation, thankfully, we don't have that right now. Stagflation is when you have a stagnant economy. The economy is not growing at all, and you have inflation. So that's not very good. So let's just talk a little bit about what is inflation. Well, inflation is rising prices. So this is really interesting. One of the leading indicators is the consumer price index, the CPI. And the consumer price index is tied to a lot of people's salaries, a lot of people's wages, a lot of people's pensions. Social Security is tied to the consumer price index. You've heard of COLA, the cost of living index, cost of living adjustment, rather, COLA. So every year, Social Security benefits are adjusted based on inflation. During the recession, there were several years when there was no adjustment was made. They're talking about a 6% increase in Social Security benefits in January. Typically, they'll go up around 2% because inflation's around 2%. But with inflation, they think that with prices going up about 6% this year, there's talk of a 6% raise for Social Security benefits. But don't get too excited for your grandparents, because this is what'll happen. They'll in turn raise the Medicare premium, or the Medicare, the premiums. Because what happens is once you get on Medicare at age 65, they reduce your Social Security by the Medicare premium. It's $100 and some a month. That'll go up. Hopefully not by 6% though. So anyway, inflation is simply too many dollars chasing too few goods, and the result is rising prices. So let me give you an example of what would happen, of how inflation happens. Let's say that Thibodaux is an isolated community, and we're all working, let's say we're all working, 30, 40 hours a week, and we're making our wages, buying the goods. And then let's say our job ramps up and they ask us to work 50 hours a week. Then we're working like 60 hours a week. They hire some more people. So unemployment is below its normal rate. Everyone's employed, and people are producing more than normal. So the economy is really, really going well, really growing at a fast rate. Well, what happens is the rise in our wages, we're making a lot more money, but the products aren't keeping up with it. So it's too many dollars chasing too few goods, you see, and it results in this rise in prices. So that's inflation. So when you have the economy really going at a really good speed, and that the problem with, like, you might ask yourself, well, what's wrong with the economy just continuing on forever? Well, if it grows too fast, you can get this inflation. And so they try to, the way that the government tries to mitigate that is they'll raise interest rates. Because when they raise interest rates, it causes companies to cut back because it increases the cost of capital. And then that will tamp down the economy a little bit. They want a smooth economy. They want the economy to grow at a smooth rate. But we have these ups and downs. So what happens is kind of a tightrope, because if they raise interest rates too much, then we could go into a recession. But if they don't do it enough, we can have inflation. So they've really done a pretty good job since the last recession at getting us out of that recession and not having inflation too high. So the feds have done a pretty good job with their policy, in my opinion. Okay, so anyway, that's what inflation is. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. It results in rising prices. A small amount of inflation is generally viewed as okay in a growing economy. 2 to 3%, and that's what the Fed said today. Their target is 2%. So 2 to 3% is fine. And that's where we are. Now, deflation is when prices are going down. Well, isn't that a good thing? If prices are going down? No, because if prices are going down, wages can be going down. You see, so think about what I was saying about the Social Security and pension plans. A lot of these things are tied to these cost of living adjustments. Well, if we have deflation, which is actually a decline in prices, you could actually have less income. If they actually they didn't cut Social Security benefits and retirement benefits. Most people didn't, but they could have during the last recession, because we did have deflation 2 to 3% for a few years. So deflation is really viewed as being worse because the economy is contracting under deflation. And it can lead to lower wages and lower pension benefits. All right. So when you read chapter 11, they're going to talk about they're getting back to they're talking about the 2007, 2009 Great Recession. And they're asking, when we had all this stimulus and all this quantitative easing during that recession, but we never had inflation. Inflation wasn't an issue. So if you're putting all this money into the economy, you would think that you would have inflation. But the reason we didn't have inflation is because the Federal Reserve, and they talk about this in the book, the Federal Reserve was paying the banks interest on their reserves. So in other words, banks have this money to loan out, okay? And so the whole idea is you lower interest rates, the banks have this money, you've got all this money supply out there, low interest rates are lower, and the banks will start loaning this money out, and it's going to ramp up the economy, and it could cause inflation. Well, the Federal Reserve was paying the banks interest on these reserves that they were keeping. So if you're a banker, why would you take the risk to loan the money if you're going to if you can sit there and hold the money and get interest from the Federal Reserve? So that's why we didn't really have inflation during that time with all the stimulus and the quantitative easing, because the Fed was paying interest to these banks. So you'll see that in the book, and that's a homework question too. Okay, so also they talk about in the book, usually when you have a recession, you go down into a recession, and then you end up with this really robust recovery. Well, we didn't have that. We had kind of a U-shaped recovery. So we went down into this recession, 2007, 2009, instead of just coming back, we went along forever. It was more of a U-shaped recovery. Well, there's some reasons why. So let's see here. Okay, so first of all, here's some statistics that is in the book that I just have highlighted here. So the 2007 to 2009 recession was the worst since World War II. Total employment fell by 6%. GDP fell by 4.8%, and the unemployment rate was averaging around 10%. Do you think that's an accurate number, 10%? Unemployment rate, 10%? Did we go over the unemployment chapter yet? And how to measure unemployment? No, you must not have. It's going to be in this section. Okay, so let me just talk briefly about that. How do they measure unemployment? Define unemployment? What does unemployed mean? Exactly. Unemployed is looking for a job. You're actively looking for a job. You're unemployed. You're not working and you're actively looking for a job. That's unemployment. So they ask you, are you unemployed? Yes or no? Are you actively seeking work? Yes or no? If you say yes, you're actively seeking work, you're part of this 10%. If you say no, I'm not actively seeking work, you're not on the radar here. So the unemployment rate was actually more like 13% probably. When you account, it's more important in a way, it's becoming more important to look at the labor force participation rate, because our labor force participation rate is down to something like 65%. It's pretty bad. So that is basically, out of all the people who can work, they take the people who are ages like 16 to 65 who aren't institutionalized in prisons or hospitals or what have you. And that percentage that can work that are working out of the percentage who could work. And it's down to like 65 to 67%. It's very low. So why is the labor force participation rate so low? Any ideas?
I mean, I guess right now, just people don't want to work because of all the money that they've gotten from the government.
Mhm.
Before this, I don't know how you would justify that.
Well, before this, I think after, during this period, a lot of people just got totally disgruntled. And they lost their jobs. Like, for example, I knew people in the finance industry that lost their jobs during this whole financial meltdown, and they just never could find jobs in their field again. And some of these people had enough money to where they could try to live, on their investments. And so those people just fell off the radar. You also have people who are underemployed. So somebody who was a financial analyst who is now, I don't know, selling cars or something. So they're not working in their field and they're underemployed. So you have, so when you talk about the labor force participation rate, a lot of people, I think, have decided that it's just cheaper to stay home. If you have a husband, partners or a husband and wife, if you run the numbers and how expensive daycare is, it actually, by the time you figure out all the gas and the clothes, the dry cleaning, you can't cook because you're too busy. It's not even worth working for some people. And daycare is ridiculous, especially if you have more than one kid. If you have a kid, one child, you could probably justify daycare. If you have two kids, maybe. But if you have that third, you might as well have somebody stay home. It's crazy. So yeah, you guys I'm sure know that. So a lot of people have just fallen off of, they're not participating anymore. And then now getting more towards present day. This is unprecedented with, I mean, there's so many, the unemployment rate is super low right now. I mean, there's so many people who are looking for workers, so many companies looking for workers. And remember, way back at the beginning of this class, when we talked about economics is all about incentives. People will behave rationally based on incentives. If I can get $600 in unemployment to stay home with my kids, why should I go work you know, and for a lot of people, the extra $600, what, every week or 2 weeks, was it every week or 2 weeks? Anybody know? I think it's a week, yeah. The extra $600 a week was more than I was making, so you might as well stay home. And then the stimulus money too, that's a lot of money for some people. Think about somebody who's making, I don't know, someone who's making between $25,000 and $30,000 a year, and they get $7,000 or more in stimulus money. That's significant. In fact, I know a couple that I have helped out. They're old friends, and I do their taxes for them. And he's retired and on disability. She doesn't work. They make like $26,000 a year, and they got over $7,000 in stimulus. So think about that. A third of your annual income in stimulus is significant. That's enough to not motivate you to work. So anyway, there's a lot of people today who aren't motivated to work because of these government programs that we have. All right. Anyway, those are some statistics. Now, there's a question. This question has come up. Should the Federal Reserve should they have stepped in with all this stimulus and this QE 1, 2, and 3 to stave off this financial panic in 2008? Because we would have gone into a depression. And during the Great Depression, GDP, think about this, in the 1930s, GDP fell by 30%. Isn't that crazy? The unemployment rate was 25%. Okay, so you've probably all heard that in history class. 1 in 4 Americans were unemployed during the Great Depression. It's actually not entirely true. Let me tell you the rest of the story, and they mention it in the book. Okay, have you guys heard of the WPA? Can't think of what it means now, but the government, under Roosevelt, the government came up with all these work progress associations, all of these programs to put people back to work. The Hoover Dam in Nevada was built by WPA workers. The Huey P. Long Bridge was built by WPA. If you go to LSU, there's some buildings there that have a plaque on them saying WPA. So the government was putting people back to work in all these programs. They even had a WPA for artists and writers and poets and stuff. Anyway, long story short, the 25% unemployment rate doesn't include all these people who were working for the government, working for the WPA. So it excludes all those programs. So they think that the unemployment rate was actually more like 17%, not 25%. Okay, so should the Federal Reserve have stepped in? Well, if they wouldn't have stepped in, we would have gone way down. We would have had this we would have gone into a depression, pretty much worldwide depression. But then we would have come out of it really quickly, gone down and then come out of it. Because of all this Federal Reserve intervention, we didn't go have the steep drop, but it just kind of it was elongated. And now we're going to pay the price for that in the form of higher taxes because the debt is so much higher now. All right. So anyway, some other facts about the 2007 to 2009 recession. This didn't happen in Thibodeau, but on average, if you think about nationally, housing prices fell 30%. So that's pretty dramatic. In some markets in California and in Nevada, in Las Vegas, for example, in that area, 50%. Imagine buying a house and having the value decline 50%. And so that caused a lot of foreclosures, and it really was unprecedented. All right. So anyway, usually the deeper the recession you have, the stronger the recovery. And so typically, like after World War II, we had 3.1 GDP growth after the recession. But after this last recession, we only had 2.5 GDP growth, 2.5% growth in GDP. In addition, it took 3 years for the unemployment rate to go from 10% to 8%. Spending also grew at a slower than normal rate. Consumer confidence was sideways, where it's usually really positive during a recovery. And also the housing recovery was slow due to oversupply. So right now we have a shortage in housing. We have an oversupply there too. And also think about this. If you're a buyer, if you're on the market for a house and housing prices are going down, are you going to buy a house right away or wait? You're going to wait, right? If you can, you want to wait, because you want to get it at the low. As a seller, you want to sell before they go down any further. But as a buyer, you want to wait to so you can hit bottom. So that was another factor that was making the housing market even worse. Okay, so here's some factors that they talk about in the book that hindered that recovery. So the reason why the recovery was so slow coming out of this last recession is because of these reasons. There were these changes in government programs. So Obama, right as we're heading, the financial meltdown had already started before Obama was elected, but he comes into office, and then these are some of the things that were instituted. So they increased the duration and the amount of unemployment benefits. Okay, so we're seeing this with COVID. People act on incentives. It's not a coincidence that a lot of people, you see a greater number of people getting jobs when their unemployment benefits run out or about to run out. And so when you extend unemployment benefits, you're going to hinder the economy. So they extended the duration of unemployment benefits, and they also increased the amount of unemployment benefits. And this is the problem. Anytime you try with any of these economic policies, you're battling human nature and you're battling incentives. So of course, the Obama administration, they were trying to help people. We were in a terrible recession. So that's why they changed the unemployment benefits. But the problem with that is you have people who are going to take advantage of the system and just ride it out the whole time. So there wasn't as much of a motivation to try to get a job and get back to work. So increasing the amount and the duration, that slowed down the recovery. The incentives to get off of welfare were weakened. Food stamp eligibility was loosened. And some health insurance premiums were paid by the government as well. I didn't see anything about that, but they mentioned that in the book. So anyway, these are some of the reasons why the recovery was so slow. Okay, so that is chapter 11. Okay, here's the unemployment chapter. Okay, so we talked about unemployment. Let's talk about it a little bit more detail. So basically, unemployment, the definition of unemployed is someone who does not have a job but is actively seeking work. Okay, so you've fallen off the radar if you're not actively seeking work. So here's the formula for the unemployment rate. The unemployed divided by the total labor force. Now, there's actually a natural unemployment rate. The natural unemployment rate is about 5%. So we always have some unemployed. Before the recession, like when we had the whole .com bubble going on, this was like in the late 90s, way before the recession, our unemployment rate actually was down to like 3%. It was below the natural rate. There were so many jobs out there to be had. More people were working than normally were working. And so when you have that situation, you really have the economy growing at a fast pace. And that's when inflation can possibly be a problem. But anyway, getting back to the natural unemployment rate, it's usually around 5%. And that's because you always have people who are in between jobs, maybe people who have graduated from college or graduated from school, they're looking for a job, or someone who's quit their job and is looking for another job. So you always have these people who are in flux. And so we consider the natural unemployment rate about 5%. When it gets above that, it can be a problem. And when we start talking in the next few weeks, when we start talking more about the economic indicators, I'm going to show you how to look online and you can find out what the unemployment rate is. And I'll show you about all these indicators. But we won't have time tonight, but we can do that in a couple of weeks. All right, so the total labor, so anyway, that's the unemployment rate, how you calculate it. The total labor force is defined as the non-institutionalized population. Okay, so anybody who is ages 16 to 65, like I said before, and not institutionalized, that's our labor force. So if you take the people who are employed plus the unemployed divided by the total labor force, that's our labor force participation rate. So anyway, getting back to this, the unemployment rate is actually understated because of all the discouraged workers. So the unemployment rate, it's debatable. I think it's usually about 3% higher than what it probably is stated, because you have all these people who are discouraged, who just have fallen off the radar, so to speak. And then also you have a lot of people who are underemployed because people are working in jobs that aren't utilizing their skill set. They can't find jobs in their field. So I've told you here why the unemployment rate is understated, because of discouraged workers and also because of people who are underemployed. Can you think of any reasons, though, why the unemployment rate could be slightly overstated? I mean, it definitely is understated overall, but there are some reasons why it could be slightly overstated. The net effect is more understated than overstated, but why could it possibly be overstated?
People could
Go ahead.
lie and say that they were searching for work so that way they could qualify for,
Oh, for unemployment benefits, yeah.
just some,
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. I hadn't really thought of that. Yeah, people do that all the time, I'm sure. They say that they're looking for a job and they're really not. So they're lying. They're counted as being unemployed when they're really not. Another reason is the underground economy. So there's a lot of people out there that are technically unemployed and getting unemployment benefits or not, but they're working for cash. So, and I'm sure we're going to see we're seeing that a lot now with the hurricane, with all this work going on with the hurricane. Okay, so that's the unemployment rate. So unemployment. So just remember the main takeaways from this: the natural unemployment rate is 5%. For the most part, the unemployment rate is understated because you have a lot of people who are discouraged. They're no longer looking for jobs, but they're not employed. Also, the labor force participation rate is low. It's among its lowest ever. It's around 65%. And then there's also this conundrum of they'll also show you the labor force participation rate by race and by sex, by race and by gender. And so it's usually the participation rate is typically lower for African Americans compared to whites. But the labor force participation rate by gender is really interesting. For women, the labor force participation rate has increased gradually as women have entered the workforce over the years, and it's kind of leveled off. For men, it's gone down. So the labor force participation rate, particularly for white males, has continued to decrease. And so there's all kinds of theories I don't really have the answer, but it's kind of a mystery as to why is this labor force participation rate decreasing for men? I think part of the reason, just from my own personal experience with family members and people I've come in contact with, it used to be very traditional where the mother always stayed home with kids. But now you're seeing more with these two income families, more so the father might stay home with the kids. And like, for example, with my sister and brother-in-law, after they had a child, she was the one who had the benefits. And so they decided, well, they decided they didn't want to pay for daycare. So it made more sense for him to stay home than for her to stay home. And so maybe that's part of the situation for the lower labor force, why the labor force participation rate for men is decreasing, because you don't have those traditional, those stereotypical roles like you used to. So anyway, that's the unemployment rate. Any questions or comments from the people on Zoom? All right, let's move on here. Okay, chapter 13 is on the gig economy. Okay, so for this chapter, I say, think about all of the new jobs that have been created from the gig economy. What are the pros and cons of these types of jobs versus more traditional jobs? Okay, so what do they mean by a gig economy, and what kind of jobs have been, what kind of new jobs are out there? I mean, I really think today it's impossible to not be able to make money somehow. So what kinds of jobs have been created from what we call the gig economy? Just think of the last 5 years. What kinds of new jobs have been created? Uber, Lyft. What else? Waiter. Okay. Have you guys heard? I'm sure you've heard of this. What's it called? Social media influencers or influencers. Have you heard of that? Okay. So, yeah, you have these influencers. You have people who are, buying stuff and selling stuff on eBay and all these websites.
Etsy.
Huh?
Etsy.
Oh, Etsy, yeah. Etsy, eBay, OfferUp. I was thinking about that when I was in line at Dillard's last Sunday, and everything was so cheap. I thought, I wonder how many people go to these Dillard clearance stores and buy a what load of stuff and just turn around and sell it. You can make a living doing that, for sure.
Turning for a profit.
Yeah. So what else? We have Uber Eats. Oh. Okay, well, we might have to just leave class when it guys, because I don't see I don't want to unplug anything there. It's 8:30 now. Okay, I have 5% left. So when it's dead, the class will be over. Oh, well, when it gets down to like 1%, I'll stop it. I should still have a few more minutes. It's fine. But I don't want to move away over there because then I won't be plugged into here anymore. So, okay. Anyway, getting back to this, what else? Oh, Airbnb. So how many people are renting out their apartments or subletting their apartments or their houses with Airbnb or VRBO? So I was talking to one of my students today in the financial planning class. I hadn't read this, but evidently there's talk of the Biden administration tracking deposits of $600 or more. Okay, so you know how right now, now I haven't read anything about this, but I'm hearing this, so I'm sure it's partially true. Right now, if you make a deposit of $10,000 or more, they track it. They're trying to pass, they're talking about passing legislation
I think I read that.
where $600, that's nothing. I mean, $600 is nothing, right? If you have a transaction go into your account or out of your account for $600, it will give the government the right to flag it and figure out where it's coming from. So my first thought when he told me this was all these people renting their places out on Airbnb and not paying taxes, that's going to get flagged now with the $600.
Or ask for 2 deposits. Like.
Ask for 2 payments, exactly. Yeah, you got to ask for 2 payments.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So is this gonna be like anybody, like
anybody.
so like if I receive a check for something, you know,
Mhm.
then it's gonna say, oh,
They could
Yeah.
flag it if they wanted to.
interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, what about people's who paychecks are more than $600? I mean,
Well, but they're claiming that.
okay,
You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
I'm talking about people. So if you're working at, let's say you're working under the table and it's gonna include a Venmo accounts. Let's say you're working under the table and you're having, well, I have a perfect example. I have a rental in New Orleans. I claim the rent, but the rent is $995 a month and the person pays me through Venmo. So they could flag that and then I would have to show them proof on my tax return. But there's a lot of people out there who aren't claiming a lot of the stuff. And now if they bring it down to $600, especially if you think about the gig economy, there's a lot of tax evasion going on with the gig economy. And they're trying to capitalize on that. And I'm not blaming the Biden administration. It could just as easily have been the Trump administration. It's just whatever administration is there. But I need to read about it because if they're going to try to tie it into some bill that has to be passed, like the debt ceiling bill or something, then we're all going to get it. I mean, that's not good that they're lowering it down to $600 because they can just spy on us even more. But anyway, getting back to this, what are the pros and cons of these types of jobs from the gig economy? Because granted, there's a lot of money to be made out there.
But it's not stable.
No, it isn't stable. So very flexible, and you can make a lot of money, but it isn't stable. But these influencers, I mean, to me, it's ridiculous with the way these influencers are, because why do people, I mean, it's really like younger people. It's like, why do you care what lipstick one of the Kardashians is wearing? I mean, to me, it's absolutely insane that somebody like a Kardashian, basically famous for nothing, they can say something about a lipstick or sponsor something and they're a billionaire now. They're making millions of dollars. It's crazy. And these influencers that get out there and talk about different things, well, like Elon Musk. Elon Musk will say something about a stock and it goes way up. It's crazy. But anyway, it's not, you can make a lot of money doing all that stuff, but it isn't stable and you don't have benefits. It's not something that you can, I mean, you better make a bunch of money while you're young doing it, because you've got to definitely be very adaptive, because it's not going to stay that way and you don't have benefits. So, the pros are you've got a lot of flexibility. It's good money for the most part, but the cons are it's just not going to be stable like traditional jobs would be. But if you think about just Uber and Lyft, how they've really put taxis out of business, big time, Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure it's called English, but in French it's like trader. You know, it's people investing money. Is it considered as like a gig economy?
No, it's not. I was just kind of, that was a side note on the influencers, but that's not considered the gig economy.
Okay.
But I was just making the point that people are so gullible about what anybody posts online. and talks about online.
No, I know, it's just like not related, just like those part of the jobs considered as.
No, no, it's not.
Since it's kind of flexible, it's inside, that's not.
It's not, but if you were giving financial advice online, that's definitely part of the gig economy. Yeah, virtual assistants or just doing like virtual financial planning. That would be. So, and then, you have the ride sharing, there's house sharing, there's crazy stuff going on out there. There's one where the food where you can, this didn't really catch on because why would anybody want to do this? But it's like, you could say, hey, I made lasagna tonight. You want to trade with me if you made something else, and you can do the food sharing. So dog walking, there, like I say, if you're, there's no reason to not be making money. There's plenty of money to be made the way things are. But then by the same token, like, for example, if you've ever tried to sell something on Amazon, they make it really difficult for, I mean, you can be one of, your stuff can just be buried down there. What about talking about the gig economy? Let's talk about YouTube. So there's people making millions on YouTube, but it's very few people making millions on YouTube. It's just, most people are not, because when you get those hits, they're paying you like fractions of a cent, for the ads. But then you have a few people like that kid, Ryan's Toys, who's made millions. It's crazy. And the baby shark phenomenon. So anyway, it is interesting times that we live in. Okay, so anyway, this was kind of a short chapter. Oh, I'm down to 1%. Okay, let me go before, I'm gonna let you go a little bit early because my computer's about to die. So go ahead and read those next few chapters and finish the chapter 2 homework. Chapter 2 will be due next Tuesday, and I'll see you all in person. Unless you have extenuating circumstances, I'll see you all in person next Tuesday. Or next Wednesday, I'm sorry, next Wednesday. Take care, everybody.